To be honest, I got quite excited with the results that simulation decomposition was able to provide for the investment case. So I started to ask all my colleagues about different models that we can experiment with and try simulation decomposition on those cases. And one of the cases was about life cycle emissions from various products. In that case was transportation pallets. And we got some interesting results there, so I want to share it with you. So everything starts with a bunch of equations that explain how those emissions are calculated, and practically they are calculated as a sum of emissions during the life of a product, from producing that product, repairing, end of life, and also transportation on the way. And every single element of that is based on the mass or the quantity of the material used and the global warming potential of that material. And the case was estimated for Finland with some variations that exist in the country. So those are the input numbers and the variations modeled as different distribution types. So, and we put all that information in Excel, and by that time I already put the SimDec logic in Excel as well, so it's easy to use. And here's the inputs, here's the distributions made from those inputs, and that's the calculation of total emissions from these randomized numbers. So practically every time we recalculate the model, this number changes. And for this model, we are running Monte Carlo simulation, and we first check the probability distribution. Here it is. Again, the shape is weird, which is why it's interesting to look inside with the decomposition. And in terms of the numerical range, it varies from negative emissions, which is good here, to positive emissions, which is clearly bad. So for decomposition, of course, I played first with different factors, and I ended up showing this graph to my colleague. And here, what is interesting in this graph? So we decompose the distribution by two factors: end of life, either burning or putting it on a landfill, and number of uses, low, medium, and high. That's it. Now let's focus first on the landfilling part. So if we have a low number of uses, which is not efficient, then of course our emissions from the life cycle of the product are higher. And the higher is the number of uses, the more efficient the process becomes, and so the emissions decrease and go almost close to zero. But if we look at the incineration part, in the burning part, then the dependence is reversed. So the more we use the pellets, the higher are the emissions. That was not very intuitive, so I showed these results to my friend and colleague, and he said to me, that's weird, you have a mistake in your model. And I'm like, no, it's your model, there is no mistake, but let's check. And we checked it, and it still works like that. And nobody understands anything. Then we start to play slowly with those factors, understanding how it works. And yeah, so it appeared that it is precisely how it works, and that this behavior of the model was hidden from the very expert, Ivan, I hope you are not listening to that, very expert of that model, and simulation decomposition allowed to reveal that dependency, that interesting thing. So practically what's going on when we burn pellets, because it's wood, we practically produce energy, and it generates negative emissions. So the faster we burn them, the better it is. So that's a trick of calculation in the life cycle emissions. But it suddenly starts to make a lot of sense when we are looking at it from a policymaking perspective. So what we need to do based on this analytics is we need to push for burning or incinerating the wooden pellets, so practically arranging some collection or some benefit for returning them and to use them in, I don't know, in thermal power plants or or elsewhere. And then we would minimize the emissions in that case. But in case it's not possible and some pellets end up on a landfill, then for those we need to push for the higher number of use. So we probably need to have some policy in place that ensures quality, that enables higher amount of uses. Here is how, by observing the holistic picture, the overall probability distribution and the interaction of individual factors inside it, we can generate much better insight for decision making, for policy making, by practically observing how factors interact inside. And here the case is very interesting because the model is nonlinear and one factor changes the direction of its influence depending on the state of another factor. And standard Monte Carlo simulation wouldn't allow us to see that. So it only starts to be visible with this approach.